The night was still resting over the land of Egypt. Far above the dark earth, countless stars shimmered softly across the sky. Their reflections trembled upon the calm surface of the Nile River. The water moved so gently that it almost seemed asleep. Along the riverbanks, tall reeds swayed in the cool breeze, making the faintest whispering sound. Most people were still asleep. Inside small mud brick homes, families rested beneath simple woven blankets. The air was cool before dawn. The heat of the day had not yet arrived. In the darkness, the village was quiet except for the occasional cry of a distant bird or the soft movement of animals shifting in their sleep. Ancient Egypt is often remembered through its great pyramids, its golden treasures, and its powerful kings. Yet there was another Egypt. A quieter Egypt. It was an Egypt filled with ordinary people. People who woke before sunrise. People who baked bread. People who carried water. People who planted seeds and repaired fishing nets. People whose names have long disappeared into the sands of time. Tonight, we begin our journey among those forgotten lives. We begin beside the Nile. The river stretched across the landscape like a ribbon of dark silver. Year after year, century after century, it carried life through the desert. Without the Nile, Egypt would have been a very different place. Beyond the green riverbanks lay vast stretches of dry land. The desert seemed endless. During the day, sunlight would shine brightly upon the sand. Heat would rise from the earth. Yet along the Nile, life flourished. Fields of grain waited quietly in the darkness. Palm trees stood like silent guardians. Small villages rested peacefully near the water. Soon, the first light of dawn would arrive. In one such village lived a young farmer named Hori. His home was simple. The walls were made from mud brick shaped by hand and dried beneath the sun. The roof was flat. The floor was packed earth. There were only a few pieces of furniture. A stool. A low table. Storage jars filled with grain. Nothing about the house would have attracted attention. It looked much like every other home in the village. Hori slept beside his family. His father rested nearby. His mother slept close to the cooking area. His younger sister lay curled beneath a woven blanket. Outside, their donkey stood quietly beside a small enclosure. Everything was still. Then slowly, almost unnoticed, the eastern horizon began to brighten. A thin line of pale light appeared. The stars faded one by one. Birds began to stir. The Nile reflected the first colors of morning. Soon, Hori opened his eyes. For a few moments, he remained still. He listened to the sounds of the awakening village. A rooster called somewhere nearby. A dog barked in the distance. The breeze moved softly across the roof. Another day was beginning. There were no clocks. No calendars hanging on walls. People measured time through sunlight, shadows, seasons, and the rising and setting of stars. Hori sat up slowly. His father was already awake. Years of farming had taught him to rise before sunrise. The fields demanded attention. Crops would not wait. The older man stretched quietly. Soon, both father and son stepped outside. The morning air felt cool against their skin. Across the village, faint movement could already be seen. Doors opened. Neighbors emerged from their homes. Some carried baskets. Others carried tools. Everyone understood the rhythm of life here. The Nile created that rhythm. The river determined when crops would grow. The river determined when fields would flood. The river determined much of daily existence. As sunlight spread across the horizon, the village gradually filled with life. Women prepared morning meals. Children rubbed sleep from their eyes. Animals began moving about their enclosures. The smell of baking bread slowly drifted through the air. It was a familiar smell. A comforting smell. One that greeted people nearly every morning. Inside Hori's home, his mother was already working. She mixed grain with water. Her hands moved with practiced skill. This task had been repeated countless times. Her mother had done the same. Her grandmother before that. Generation after generation. Simple routines connected families across centuries. Soon, flat loaves of bread baked over the fire. The warm aroma filled the small house. Breakfast was modest. Bread. A few vegetables. Sometimes dried fish. Sometimes dates. Nothing extravagant. Yet it was enough. The family ate quietly. Sunlight now illuminated the village streets. People greeted one another as they passed. Children laughed. Donkeys brayed. The day had begun in earnest. After eating, Hori and his father prepared for work. Their fields lay not far from the village. They gathered simple farming tools. Wooden handles polished smooth from years of use. Tools passed down through generations. Nothing was wasted in ancient Egypt. Objects were repaired repeatedly. Every item required labor to create. Every possession held value. The two farmers began walking toward the fields. The path followed the riverbank. Morning sunlight sparkled upon the water. Fishing boats drifted quietly nearby. Fishermen were already at work. Their silhouettes moved against the golden reflection of dawn. The Nile looked peaceful. Yet it was also powerful. Each year the river flooded. The floodwaters spread across the land. When the waters eventually retreated, rich black soil remained behind. This fertile soil allowed crops to grow. Ancient Egyptians depended upon this cycle. They observed it carefully. They respected it deeply. As Hori walked, he noticed familiar sights. Palm trees swaying gently. Birds gliding overhead. Neighbors tending animals. Children carrying jars of water. The village was alive with activity. Yet everything moved at an unhurried pace. Life followed natural rhythms. There was work to do. But there was also patience. The land taught patience. Seeds required time. Floodwaters required time. Harvests required time. Nothing could be rushed. Soon they reached the fields. Rows of grain stretched before them. Green shoots moved softly beneath the breeze. The sight brought quiet satisfaction. Healthy crops meant food. Healthy crops meant survival. For countless generations, families had felt the same relief when seeing strong fields. The father examined the soil. Hori inspected irrigation channels. Water management was essential. Small canals carried water where it was needed. Farmers constantly maintained these systems. Without water, crops would fail. Without crops, hunger would follow. The work required care and attention. For several hours they labored beneath the steadily rising sun. The air gradually became warmer. Birdsong echoed across the fields. Insects buzzed among plants. The sounds blended into a gentle rhythm. Work. Rest. Work again. A peaceful cycle repeated throughout the morning. By midday, the sun stood high above the land. Its warmth now covered the valley. Many workers paused briefly for rest. Hori sat beneath the shade of a palm tree. From there he could see the Nile in the distance. The river glimmered brightly. Boats moved slowly across the water. Beyond the green fields stretched the desert, golden and silent. The contrast was remarkable. Life on one side, vast emptiness on the other. Ancient Egyptians understood this contrast better than anyone. The desert was always present, always watching from beyond the fertile valley. For thousands of years, it shaped the lives of those living beside the river. Hori drank water and watched the landscape quietly. He did not know that thousands of years later, people would study this world with fascination. He did not know that future generations would marvel at Egypt's monuments. He simply lived his life, one day at a time, like millions of others. And that hidden world of ordinary people is where our story truly begins. Not among kings, not among treasures, but among farmers, families, and quiet villages beside the Nile. As afternoon slowly approached, the sunlight shimmered across the river. The breeze carried the scent of wet soil. Voices drifted softly across the fields. Another ordinary day was unfolding in ancient Egypt. A day much like yesterday. A day much like tomorrow. And while history often remembers the great rulers whose names were carved into stone, the true heartbeat of Egypt lived here. In places like this. Among people like Hori. Beside the river that gave life to an entire civilization. And as the sun continued its slow journey across the sky, a new chapter of our journey quietly waited ahead. The sun continued to climb across the Egyptian sky. Its warm light spread gently over the fields, the river, and the small village where Hori and his family lived. The coolness of dawn had now faded. In its place came the familiar warmth of another day beside the Nile. The village was fully awake. From a distance, it appeared simple. Rows of mud brick homes stood close together. Narrow paths wound between them. Small courtyards opened behind some houses. Storage jars rested beside walls. Baskets hung from wooden pegs. Chickens wandered freely, pecking at the ground. There were no grand palaces here. No towering monuments. No glittering treasures. Yet this quiet village contained something just as important. It contained everyday life. The kind of life that filled Egypt for thousands of years. The kind of life that history books often pass by too quickly. As Hori rested beneath the palm tree, his thoughts drifted toward home. His mother would be busy with her daily tasks. There was always something to do. Ancient Egyptian households rarely sat idle. Every day brought its own responsibilities. Back at the village, the morning had settled into a steady rhythm. Women moved through courtyards carrying baskets. Some ground grain into flour using heavy stone tools. The work required patience. Again and again, the stone moved across the grain. Hour after hour. Day after day. The sound was familiar throughout Egypt. A quiet scraping sound. Simple. Steady. Unchanging. Nearby, another woman kneaded dough. Her hands worked carefully. She shaped small loaves and placed them near a clay oven. Soon the smell of baking bread drifted through the air once more. Bread was at the center of daily life. Rich or poor, nearly everyone ate it. It appeared at breakfast. It appeared at midday. It appeared again in the evening. The shape might vary. The ingredients might change slightly. But bread remained a constant companion. Not far away, Hori's younger sister, Nefru, helped carry water. Though still young, she already understood many household duties. Children in ancient Egypt learned early. They watched their parents. They copied their actions. Knowledge passed naturally from one generation to the next. No written instructions were needed. Life itself became the teacher. Nefru balanced a clay jar carefully. The path to the river was familiar. Many people walked it every day. The Nile provided water for drinking, cooking, washing, and countless other tasks. As she approached the riverbank, she joined several neighbors. Women exchanged quiet greetings. Children played nearby. A fisherman repaired a net beneath the shade of a tree. Everything felt calm. The river flowed steadily beside them. The same river that had flowed through Egypt long before any of them were born. And the same river that would continue flowing long after they were gone. There was comfort in that thought. The Nile seemed eternal. Its presence shaped every aspect of life. Many Egyptians felt a deep connection to it. Not merely as a source of water, but as something larger. Something woven into the very fabric of existence. Nefru filled her jar. The cool water rippled softly around her hands. Small fish darted beneath the surface. The sunlight sparkled upon the moving current. For a moment she simply watched. There was no hurry. Ancient life often moved more slowly than modern minds imagine. Work was constant. Yet nature set the pace. People followed the rhythm of daylight. The rhythm of seasons. The rhythm of the river itself. Back in the village, older residents sat together beneath a shaded area. Their faces carried the marks of many years. Deep lines shaped by sunlight and time. They spoke quietly, sharing stories, remembering harvests, remembering floods, remembering people who were no longer there. In a world without photographs, memory held great importance. Stories became living records. A grandfather might tell a child about events that had happened decades earlier. That child would later tell the same story to another generation. In this way, the past remained alive. The village itself seemed full of memory. Every wall, every path, every tree, all had witnessed countless lives unfolding. Meanwhile, farther down the river, boats continued their journeys. Some carried grain. Others transported pottery, fish, or woven goods. The Nile functioned as Egypt's great highway. Travel by boat was often easier than travel by land. The current and winds helped move vessels north and south. For many Egyptians, boats connected distant communities. News traveled along the river. Goods traveled along the river. Ideas traveled along the river. Life flowed through Egypt much as the Nile itself flowed through the landscape. As midday approached, heat settled over the valley. The sunlight became stronger. Workers sought moments of shade when possible. Animals rested beneath trees. Even the birds seemed quieter. The village slowed. Not completely, but enough to respect the heat of the day. Inside many homes, thick mud brick walls helped keep interiors cooler. The builders understood their environment well. Generations of experience had taught them how to create comfortable living spaces. A typical home contained several rooms. One room might be used for sleeping. Another for storing food. A roof area could provide additional space during cooler evenings. Furniture remained simple. Wood was valuable. Every item served a purpose. Many possessions were handmade. Each basket, each stool, each clay jar, each woven mat, all represented hours of labor. Nothing was disposable. Objects stayed with families for many years. Repairs were common. Waste was rare. As afternoon continued, Hori and his father resumed their work. The grain fields swayed gently. The irrigation channels carried water exactly where it was needed. The system required constant attention. A blocked channel could harm crops. A damaged embankment could waste precious water. Farmers understood these risks. They worked carefully, patiently, methodically. The land rewarded attention and punished neglect. Hori often enjoyed these quiet hours. The repetitive nature of farming created space for thought. The steady movement, the familiar tasks, the sounds of nature, everything blended together. Sometimes he watched birds glide above the river. Sometimes he noticed insects moving among the plants. Sometimes he simply listened. The breeze moving through the grain created a soft whispering sound, almost like distant voices. It was a sound farmers had heard for countless generations. A sound that connected them to the land. As shadows gradually lengthened, the harshest heat began to fade. The afternoon softened. Workers became more active again. The village slowly regained energy. Children emerged from shaded areas. Animals wandered more freely. Conversations grew louder. Life continued. Yet beneath these ordinary moments existed something deeper. Ancient Egypt is often remembered through kings and monuments because stone survives. Stone resists time. Stone endures. But the lives of ordinary people were built from materials that vanished. Mud brick crumbled. Wood decayed. Fabric disappeared. The daily experiences of countless individuals faded into silence. Their laughter, their worries, their hopes, their routines. Most left little trace behind. And yet they formed the true foundation of Egyptian civilization. Without farmers, there would have been no grain. Without laborers, no construction. Without craftsmen, no tools. Without families, no future generations. The famous monuments depended upon ordinary lives. The hidden side of Egypt lived in villages like this one. Far from royal courts. Far from golden treasures. Here, people worried about crops. They worried about weather. They worried about family. The concerns were simple, human, timeless. As evening slowly approached, Hori and his father finally prepared to return home. The workday was ending. The sunlight now carried a golden glow. Long shadows stretched across the fields. The Nile reflected the colors of the sky. Orange, gold, soft shades of red. The landscape seemed peaceful, almost dreamlike. Father and son walked slowly back toward the village. They passed fishermen gathering their equipment, neighbors returning from work, children chasing one another along dusty paths. The air had cooled slightly. The scent of cooking fires drifted through the village. Evening meals were being prepared. Families would soon gather together. Stories would be shared. Food would be eaten. The day would gradually come to rest. Above them, the sky slowly deepened in color. Another sunset was arriving over ancient Egypt. Another day quietly slipping into memory. And as Hori approached his home, unaware of the many centuries that separated his world from ours, life continued exactly as it had for generations. Slowly. Peacefully. Beside the river that sustained everything. The river whose gentle waters still flowed beneath the fading light of evening. And while darkness waited beyond the horizon, another hidden chapter of Egypt's ordinary life was waiting to unfold. The sun drifted lower and lower toward the western horizon. Its golden light stretched across the Nile Valley, painting the fields in soft shades of amber and bronze. Long shadows reached across the ground. the heat of the day slowly began to loosen its grip on the land. For many people, this was their favorite time. The hardest work was ending. The evening breeze was beginning to arrive. The village seemed to breathe more slowly. Hori walked beside his father along the familiar path home. Dust clung lightly to their feet after a long day in the fields. Around them, other villagers were also returning. A fisherman carried a basket filled with his catch. A shepherd guided a small group of goats toward their enclosure. Children ran through the narrow paths, laughing as they chased one another. The sounds of the village blended together softly. Nothing felt hurried. Nothing felt loud. The day was settling into evening. As Hori approached his family's home, he noticed thin streams of smoke rising from rooftops across the village. Evening meals were being prepared. The scent of baking bread drifted through the air once again. Nearby, someone was roasting onions. Another family cooked lentils in a clay pot. Simple foods. Familiar foods. The kinds of meals that had nourished countless generations. Inside the house, Hori's mother was already working near the cooking area. A small fire glowed gently. Clay pots rested above the flames. The room felt warm and welcoming. The smell of food filled the air. For a moment, Hori simply stood in the doorway. There was comfort in returning home after a day of labor. Comfort in familiar walls. Comfort in familiar faces. Comfort in knowing that tomorrow would likely begin much the same way. His younger sister Nefru sat nearby, helping prepare vegetables. She worked carefully, learning the skills that would one day become second nature. Ancient Egyptian children learned through observation. They watched. They listened. They practiced. Knowledge moved quietly from one generation to the next. There were lessons in nearly every task. How to prepare food. How to repair tools. How to care for animals. How to manage a household. Life itself was a classroom. Soon the family gathered together. The evening meal was simple. Fresh bread. Lentils. Onions. A small amount of fish. Dates for sweetness. Nothing extravagant. Yet the meal carried meaning beyond the food itself. It was a moment of togetherness. A moment when the day's work faded into the background. A moment to share stories and observations. Hori's father spoke about the condition of the fields. The irrigation channels were working well. The grain looked healthy. The family listened carefully. Successful harvests affected everyone. Food meant security. Food meant stability. Food meant survival. The conversation moved naturally. No one rushed. The flickering fire cast soft shadows against the mud brick walls. Outside, the village continued its evening routine. Dogs barked occasionally. Neighbors exchanged greetings. Children slowly disappeared indoors as darkness approached. The air cooled further. The stars would soon appear. For thousands of years, Egyptians lived beneath one of the clearest night skies in the world. Without artificial light, the heavens revealed themselves fully. Every evening, countless stars emerged above the valley. The Milky Way stretched across the darkness like a river of light. Many people knew the stars well. Farmers observed them. Sailors followed them. Priests studied them. Ordinary villagers admired them. The sky was an important part of life. After the meal, Hori stepped outside. The sunset was fading. The western horizon still glowed softly. Palm trees stood in silhouette against the remaining light. The Nile reflected the colors of evening. Everything felt peaceful. Nearby, Several older villagers sat together. This was a common sight. Evening often brought people together. After a day of work, stories naturally emerged. One man spoke about a flood from many years earlier. Another remembered a harvest that had filled every storage jar. A woman recalled family members who had passed away long ago. Stories flowed gently from one person to another. These conversations served many purposes. They entertained. They taught. They preserved memories. In a world without books for most people, spoken stories carried great importance. Children listened closely. Young minds absorbed every detail. Lessons about patience. Lessons about hard work. Lessons about kindness. Lessons about survival. All passed from voice to voice. The village itself seemed built upon generations of shared memory. Every family had stories. Every household carried its own history. Some stories were joyful. Others were sad. Most were simple. Yet together they formed the hidden story of Egypt. Not the story carved into temple walls. Not the story written about kings. But the story of ordinary lives. Lives filled with small moments. Small victories. Small challenges. Small acts of care. As darkness deepened, oil lamps began to glow inside homes. Their light was soft and gentle. Nothing like the bright lights of modern cities. Only small circles of warmth surrounded by darkness. The village grew quieter. The daytime energy slowly faded. Animals settled into their enclosures. Birds found places to rest. The river continued flowing beside the village. Steady. Patient. Unchanging. Hori often enjoyed these nighttime hours. The world felt different after sunset. More reflective. More peaceful. The stars encouraged quiet thoughts. They reminded people how vast the world truly was. And yet, despite that vastness, life remained centered on simple things. Family. Food. Work. Community. The changing seasons. The river. These formed the foundation of existence. Inside the house, Hori's mother finished cleaning the cooking area. Clay pots were carefully stored. Food was protected from animals. Everything had its place. Order mattered. A well-managed household made daily life easier. Many Egyptian women possessed remarkable practical knowledge. They managed supplies, prepared meals, raised children, produced cloth, maintained homes. Their contributions supported entire families. Yet history often mentions them only briefly. The hidden side of Egypt includes their stories as well. Stories lived quietly behind household walls. Stories rarely carved into stone. As the evening continued, Nefra grew sleepy. The long day had tired her. Soon she settled onto a woven mat. Within minutes, she was asleep. Children often adapted naturally to the rhythm of the sun. They woke early. They slept soon after darkness arrived. The adults remained awake a little longer. The night air drifting through the doorway felt pleasant. Some neighbors still talked softly outside. Others had already retired for the evening. The village was gradually falling asleep. One home at a time. One family at a time. The moon rose higher into the sky. Its pale light touched the rooftops. Touched the river. Touched the fields where tomorrow's work awaited. Everything seemed wrapped in silence. Not complete silence. The Nile never became completely silent. Its waters always moved. Reeds always rustled. Night birds occasionally called. Yet the sounds felt gentle, comforting, part of the natural rhythm of life. Hori stepped outside once more before sleeping. He looked toward the river. Moonlight shimmered across the water. The scene felt timeless, almost unchanged from generations before him. And in many ways, it was. The same moon had watched over his grandparents, and their grandparents before them. The same river had flowed past countless villages, countless families, countless lives. Some remembered, most forgotten, yet all part of Egypt's long story. The famous monuments still lay far beyond Hori's daily concerns. He did not spend his evenings thinking about kings. He thought about crops, about family, about tomorrow's work. His world was smaller, but no less meaningful. The hidden side of ancient Egypt lived in these quiet moments. Moments that rarely appear in grand histories. A shared meal, a family conversation, the comfort of home after a long day, the sight of stars above the Nile, the feeling of safety beneath familiar walls. As the village finally surrendered to sleep, darkness settled gently across the valley. The fields rested. The river flowed. The stars watched silently overhead. And somewhere beyond the horizon, another day was already making its slow approach. A new dawn. A new chapter. A new glimpse into the lives of ordinary Egyptians whose stories still linger quietly beneath the sands of time. The night passed quietly over the Nile Valley. The stars slowly crossed the sky. The moon drifted westward. The river continued its endless journey through the darkness. Inside the village, families slept peacefully. Oil lamps had long since gone dark. The sounds of conversation had faded. Even the animals rested. Only the soft whisper of the breeze moved through the reeds near the water. For a few precious hours, the entire valley seemed still. Then, little by little, morning began to return. The eastern horizon grew pale. The darkness softened. Birds stirred among the palm trees. The familiar cycle was beginning once again. Long before kings built pyramids, long before golden treasures filled royal tombs, Egypt began with mornings very much like this one. Quiet mornings. Simple mornings. Mornings in small villages beside the Nile. The hidden story of Egypt does not start with monuments. It starts with ordinary people. Thousands of years before the Great Pyramids appeared on the horizon, families were already living beside the river. They built homes from mud and reeds. They planted crops. They raised children. They watched the floods come and go. Little by little, these early communities laid the foundation for everything that followed. As dawn spread across the village, Hori awoke once again. The routine felt familiar. Comfortingly familiar. The same sounds. The same smells. The same responsibilities. His father was already outside. The older man stood quietly, looking toward the fields. The early sunlight painted the landscape in soft shades of gold. The river shimmered gently. It was easy to understand why people had settled here thousands of years earlier. The Nile offered something precious. It offered stability. In a world where much of the surrounding land was dry and harsh, the river provided life. Year after year, it returned with its floods. Year after year, crops grew from the rich soil left behind. Families could survive here. Communities could grow here. Civilization itself could grow here. Long ago, the first villagers discovered this truth. At first, the settlements were small. A few homes clustered near the water. A handful of families working together. Nothing grand. Nothing famous. Yet those small beginnings mattered. Every civilization begins quietly. Not with greatness, but with ordinary people trying to build stable lives. As Hori helped prepare for another day, he unknowingly followed traditions that stretched far into the past. The methods used by his family had evolved over generations. Many daily tasks would have been recognizable to people who lived centuries before him. The grinding of grain, the baking of bread, the carrying of water, the repairing of tools, the tending of crops. These activities connected countless generations. Back in those earliest villages, life was simple but demanding. People worked closely with nature. The river's behavior determined much of their future. A good flood brought prosperity. A poor flood created hardship. Observation became essential. The earliest Egyptians paid close attention to the natural world. They watched the water levels. They studied the seasons. They noticed patterns. Slowly, knowledge accumulated. One generation taught the next. Each year added new experience. Over time, villages became more organized. People discovered better farming methods. Storage systems improved. Homes became more durable. Communities expanded. The changes happened gradually. So gradually that individuals may barely have noticed them. Yet century after century, small improvements transformed life along the Nile. As the morning continued, Hori accompanied his father toward the fields once more. The path felt familiar beneath their feet. Birds glided overhead. The air remained cool. Along the way, they passed neighbors beginning their own daily routines. A potter carried freshly shaped clay vessels. A fisherman inspected his nets. A woman swept the area outside her home. Simple scenes. Everyday scenes. Yet these ordinary activities formed the true heart of Egyptian society. History often celebrates rulers. But civilizations depend upon workers. Upon farmers. Upon craftsmen. Upon families. Without them, even the greatest king could accomplish very little. The hidden side of Egypt existed in these quiet routines. And it had existed for thousands of years. The earliest villagers learned to cooperate. No family could manage everything alone. Irrigation systems required shared effort. Harvests demanded teamwork. Large tasks often involved entire communities. This cooperation strengthened villages. Relationships became important. Trust became important. A person's reputation mattered. People depended upon one another. As Egypt slowly developed into a more organized society, these local connections remained essential. Even when powerful rulers emerged, village life continued much as it always had. The farmer still planted seeds. The baker still made bread. The potter still shaped clay. Daily life moved forward. Steady and dependable. The great events recorded by history often felt distant from ordinary people. A new ruler might come to power. A temple might be constructed. A military campaign might take place. Yet in villages beside the Nile, much remained unchanged. Children still learned from their parents. Families still shared meals. Fields still required attention. The rhythm of everyday life endured. As the sun climbed higher, Hori worked alongside his father. The irrigation channels required maintenance. Small adjustments ensured water reached the crops properly. The work was repetitive. Yet repetition formed an important part of ancient life. Many tasks were performed again and again. Season after season. Year after year. The predictability offered comfort. People understood their roles. They understood what needed to be done. There was satisfaction in that knowledge. Nearby, the grain moved gently in the breeze. The sound reminded Hori of whispered conversation. The fields always seemed alive. Not with noise, but with quiet movement. The land rewarded patience. Seeds took time to grow. Harvests took time to arrive. Life itself unfolded slowly. Much more slowly than many people imagine today. In the earliest villages, this slow pace shaped people's understanding of the world. Nature taught patience. The river taught patience. Time itself seemed to move differently. The flood would come when it came. The crops would ripen when they were ready. No amount of rushing could change those realities. And so generations learned to work with nature rather than against it. By midday, the village once again settled into its familiar rhythm. The heat increased. Workers sought moments of shade. Conversations became quieter. Animals rested. The landscape shimmered beneath the sunlight. From a distance, the Nile Valley appeared peaceful. A narrow ribbon of green surrounded by endless desert. Yet beneath that peaceful appearance existed countless individual lives. Thousands upon thousands of stories. Most never recorded. Most never remembered by name. And yet they mattered. Every family contributed something. Every generation added another layer to Egypt's long history. The famous monuments that would one day rise above the landscape were only possible because of centuries of gradual development. The skills required to build them did not appear suddenly. They emerged from generations of craftsmen learning their trade. From generations of laborers gaining experience. From generations of communities working together. The roots of greatness often begin in ordinary places. A small village. A simple home. A family sharing knowledge. These humble beginnings shaped the future. As afternoon approached, Hori paused to drink water. He looked across the valley. The river sparkled in the distance. Palm trees swayed gently. Birds circled overhead. Everything appeared calm. The scene could easily have existed centuries earlier. In many ways, it had. The hidden side of Egypt is not found only in what changed. It is also found in what remained the same. Generation after generation, people rose with the sun. Worked beside the river. Shared meals with family. Watched the stars at night. The details varied. The larger rhythm endured. That rhythm connected the earliest villagers to Hori's world. And it connected Hori's world to the generations that would follow. The Nile continued flowing. The seasons continued turning. Life continued unfolding. Quietly. Patiently. Steadily. And as the afternoon sunlight drifted across the fields, another chapter of this hidden story waited ahead. A story not of kings or monuments, but of the skilled hands that shaped clay, wove cloth, and built the everyday world of ancient Egypt. The afternoon sun hung gently above the Nile Valley. A warm breeze drifted across the fields and through the narrow paths of the village. The grain continued its soft dance beneath the light. Birds occasionally crossed the sky. The river flowed steadily as it always had. Hori and his father remained at work, but throughout the village many other hands were busy with different tasks. Ancient Egypt was not built by farmers alone. Every community depended upon skilled craftsmen. People whose work rarely appeared in royal inscriptions. People whose names were seldom carved into stone. People whose creations filled homes, markets, workshops, and temples. The hidden side of Egypt lived through their hands. Not far from Hori's home stood the workshop of a potter named Mena. His work began long before sunrise on many days. He understood clay the way farmers understood soil. He knew where to find it. He knew how much water to add. He knew how long it should rest before shaping. Years of experience guided every movement. This knowledge had not come from books. It had come from observation, from mistakes, from patience, from countless hours of practice. Mena sat beneath a shaded structure near his workshop. Before him rested a lump of damp clay. At first glance, it seemed ordinary. Nothing more than earth mixed with water. Yet within his hands it would become something useful. Something needed. Slowly he began to work. His fingers moved carefully. The clay responded to gentle pressure. Little by little, a vessel emerged. Its walls grew taller. Its shape became more defined. The transformation felt almost magical. Yet it was simply skill. Skill developed over many years. Across ancient Egypt, potters supplied communities with countless objects. Storage jars, cooking pots, water containers, bowls, lamps. Without pottery, daily life would have been far more difficult. Every household relied upon these items. And every item began with a craftsman like Mena. Nearby, rows of finished vessels rested in the sunlight. Some were drying. Others had already been fired. Each one represented hours of labor. Each one carried the mark of human hands. The work required concentration. A small mistake could ruin the entire piece. Yet Mena enjoyed the quiet rhythm of his craft. The turning clay. The steady movement. The familiar feel of earth beneath his fingers. There was satisfaction in creating something useful. Something that would become part of another family's daily life. Elsewhere in the village, another craftswoman worked patiently. Her name was Tia. She was a weaver. Like many women throughout Egypt, she possessed remarkable skill with thread and fabric. The process began with plant fibers. These fibers were cleaned and prepared. Then they were spun into thread. The thread was woven into cloth. Every step required time. Every step required attention. Tia sat beside a loom. The afternoon light filtered softly through the opening of her workspace. Her hands moved with practiced precision. Back and forth. Again and again. The rhythm was almost hypnotic. The loom produced a gentle sound as it worked. A quiet clicking. A steady pattern. One movement following another. Hour after hour. Thread gradually became fabric. Fabric became clothing. Clothing became an essential part of daily life. Most people rarely considered how much labor existed behind a simple garment. Yet Tia understood. Every piece of cloth represented patience. Every piece carried the effort of many hands. Throughout Egypt, weaving played a vital role in society. Families needed clothing. Workers needed garments suitable for labor. Temples required fabric. Even burial preparations often involved carefully woven linen. The demand never truly disappeared. As a result, weaving remained an important skill for generations. The village depended upon people like Tia. Just as it depended upon farmers and fishermen. Every profession supported the others. Each person contributed something valuable. This interconnectedness shaped daily life. No one existed entirely alone. A farmer needed pottery. A potter needed food. A fisherman needed woven nets. A weaver needed tools. The community functioned because people worked together. The hidden side of Egypt was built upon these relationships. As afternoon slowly moved toward evening, another craftsman worked beneath the shade of a tree. His name was Beck. He repaired wooden tools. Wood was precious in Egypt. Large forests were rare. Good timber often arrived through trade. As a result, wooden objects were carefully maintained. Nothing was casually discarded. When a tool broke, it was repaired. When furniture weakened, it was strengthened. When handles wore down, they were replaced. Beck understood this responsibility. His hands were rough from years of labor. Small cuts and scars marked his fingers. Signs of a life spent working with tools. Before him rested a damaged farming implement. Patiently he examined it. Carefully he began repairs. There was no urgency. Only attention. Only skill. Many ancient craftsmen approached their work this way. Steadily. Methodically. With quiet pride. Their goal was not fame. Their goal was usefulness. A well-made object could serve a family for years. Perhaps even decades. That knowledge brought satisfaction. As Hori worked in the fields, he occasionally glanced toward the village. Though he could not see every workshop, he understood their importance. His own life depended upon the efforts of others. The jars storing grain in his home. The clothing he wore. The tools he carried. All came from skilled craftsmen. Civilization itself depended upon specialization. As communities grew larger, people developed expertise in particular tasks. This allowed knowledge to deepen. Skills improved. Quality increased. Over generations, craftsmanship became increasingly refined. The great achievements of Egypt were built upon these foundations. Before massive monuments could be constructed, countless craftsmen had to master smaller projects. Before beautiful temples could exist, generations of workers had to learn their trades. Great accomplishments rarely emerge from nowhere. They grow slowly. Like crops in a field. Like children becoming adults. Like villages becoming civilizations. The afternoon shadows gradually lengthened. The harshest heat of the day softened. Across the village, craftsmen began organizing their work. Some completed final tasks. Others prepared for tomorrow. The pace remained calm. Nobody rushed. The rhythm of life encouraged patience. Evening would arrive soon enough. There was no need to hurry it. Mena placed newly shaped pottery in a safe location. Tia carefully folded finished fabric. Beck gathered his tools. Another day of work was nearing its end. Yet their efforts would continue tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. The cycle repeated endlessly. Generation after generation. Many craftsmen inherited their professions from parents or relatives. Knowledge passed through families. Techniques improved little by little. Skills accumulated across centuries. This slow transfer of knowledge helped preserve Egyptian culture. Traditions endured because people taught one another. Not through grand ceremonies, but through daily practice. A parent showing a child. A master teaching an apprentice. A worker sharing experience. Simple moments. Quiet moments. Yet profoundly important ones. As evening approached, golden sunlight bathed the village. The river reflected the changing colors of the sky. Palm trees cast long shadows across the ground. The day's labor was ending. Families would soon gather for meals. Stories would soon be shared. The village would once again prepare for night. But beneath these familiar routines existed a truth often overlooked. Ancient Egypt was not only a land of rulers and monuments. It was a land of workers, of craftsmen, of skilled hands quietly shaping the world around them. The potter shaping clay, the weaver creating cloth, the carpenter repairing tools, the countless individuals whose labor filled homes and sustained communities. Most history remembers kings. Yet everyday life depended upon people like these. People whose names rarely survived. People whose stories often faded. And yet their work touched nearly every aspect of Egyptian existence. The hidden side of Egypt lived through them. Through their patience. Through their skill. Through the quiet beauty of ordinary labor. As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, the village settled into the soft glow of evening once more. And beyond the workshops and homes, another chapter waited quietly ahead. A chapter carried upon the waters of the Nile itself. A chapter about fishermen, boat builders, and the people whose lives were tied to the river every single day. The evening light rested softly upon the Nile. Golden reflections shimmered across the water. Gentle ripples moved toward the shore. Reeds swayed quietly in the breeze. The river seemed peaceful, almost dreamlike, as if it had all the time in the world. And perhaps it did. Long before Hori was born, the Nile had flowed through Egypt. Long before villages stood along its banks, the Nile had flowed through Egypt. Long before kings ruled and monuments rose from the desert, the Nile had flowed through Egypt. The river was older than memory. Older than stories. Older than any human record. For the people of ancient Egypt, the Nile was not simply water. It was life itself. As evening settled over the village, a fisherman named Jahudi guided his small boat toward the shore. The day had been long but productive. His nets held several fish. Not a great catch. Not a poor catch. Enough. For many fishermen, enough was all they hoped for. The boat slid gently onto the muddy bank. Jahudi stepped into the shallow water and pulled the vessel closer. Nearby, other fishermen were doing the same. The scene repeated itself every evening along countless stretches of the Nile. Boats returning home. Nets being gathered. Families waiting nearby. The rhythm had remained largely unchanged for generations. Fishing required patience. Much like farming. The river could be generous. The river could also be unpredictable. Some days the nets returned full. Other days they returned nearly empty. No fisherman could control the river completely. They learned to work with it, to respect it, to understand its moods. Jahudi lifted his nets carefully. The rope felt rough against his hands. Years of labor had left calluses across his palms. The work was not easy. Fishing demanded strength. It demanded endurance. It demanded knowledge. A successful fisherman understood currents. He understood seasonal changes. He understood where fish preferred to gather. This knowledge often came from older generations. A father teaching a son. An uncle teaching a nephew. One lesson at a time. One trip at a time. The river itself became the teacher. As Jahudi walked toward the village, he passed children playing near the shoreline. Their laughter drifted softly through the evening air. Some skipped stones across the water. Others chased one another among the reeds. The Nile had always been part of childhood. Children grew up beside it. Learned to swim in it. Fetched water from it. Watched boats travel across it. The river was woven into daily life from the very beginning. Farther downstream, several men worked on a different task. They were boat builders. Their work was essential. Without boats, Egypt would have been a very different place. The Nile connected communities. It connected farms and markets. It connected villages and cities. Travel by water was often faster and easier than travel across land. As a result, boats became one of the most important technologies in Egyptian life. The boat builders worked carefully. Wood was valuable. Every piece mattered. Mistakes could be costly. The men examined each section closely, checking joints, smoothing surfaces, strengthening weak areas. Their movements were patient and deliberate. Good craftsmanship required attention. A poorly built boat could fail at the worst possible moment. A strong boat might serve a family for many years. Nearby, an older craftsman shared advice with a younger apprentice. The apprentice listened carefully. Knowledge was precious. Experience was precious. Lessons learned through years of work could not be replaced easily. The hidden side of Egypt often depended upon this quiet transfer of skill. One generation teaching the next. Not in grand ceremonies. Not through written declarations. But through ordinary daily interactions. A hand showing another hand. A voice offering guidance. A patient correction. Small moments that shaped the future. As darkness slowly approached, Jehudi reached his home. His family greeted him warmly. The fish would provide food. Some might be traded. Some might be dried for later use. Nothing would be wasted. In ancient Egypt, resources were valued deeply. Every harvest mattered. Every catch mattered. Every useful object mattered. People understood how much labor existed behind even simple necessities. Inside the home, preparations for the evening meal were underway. The familiar scent of bread filled the air. Oil lamps flickered gently. Outside, the village continued settling into night. The pace slowed. Conversations softened. Animals grew quiet. The sky deepened into shades of blue and purple. The first stars appeared. Meanwhile, the Nile continued flowing. The river never truly rested. Day and night, season after season, it moved steadily through the valley. Many Egyptians found comfort in that constancy. Life could be uncertain. Floods varied. Harvests varied. Fortunes changed. Yet the river remained. Always present. Always moving. Always connecting the land. For this reason, the Nile held a special place in people's thoughts. Not only because it provided food and water, but because it offered continuity. A sense of permanence. A reminder that life moved in cycles. The flood would return. The crops would grow again. The seasons would continue. There was reassurance in these patterns. As the stars multiplied overhead, fishermen throughout Egypt looked upon the same sky. Some rested beside villages. Others camped farther from home. Many spent time repairing nets before sleep. Fishing equipment required constant maintenance. A small tear could become a larger problem. A weak knot could fail unexpectedly. Attention to detail mattered. The best fishermen understood this. Success often depended upon small things. Small habits. Small observations. Small acts of care. The same was true throughout Egyptian society. Great achievements were built upon countless small efforts. A field carefully maintained. A tool properly repaired. A boat skillfully constructed. A net patiently mended. The hidden side of Egypt lived within these details. The details rarely mentioned by monuments. The details rarely recorded by scribes. yet the details that sustained everyday life. As the night deepened, moonlight began reflecting upon the river. Silver light danced across the surface. The reeds cast delicate shadows. The boats resting along the shore seemed peaceful, almost asleep. The entire landscape felt calm, still, timeless. Hori stood outside his home for a moment before bed. He looked toward the Nile. From where he stood, the river appeared almost magical beneath the moonlight. The water seemed to glow. The distant sounds of frogs and insects drifted through the darkness. A cool breeze touched his face. For a moment, there was nothing demanding his attention. No work. No responsibilities. Only the quiet beauty of the night. Moments like these were easy to overlook. History rarely records them. Yet they formed part of life. Part of what it meant to be human. Part of what it meant to live beside the Nile. Tomorrow would bring new tasks. The fields would require attention. The craftsmen would return to their workshops. The fishermen would launch their boats once more. Life would continue. Steadily. Patiently. Just as it always had. And somewhere beyond the darkness, another hidden story was waiting. A story carried not by farmers or fishermen, but by those who could read, write, and preserve knowledge. A story about the scribes whose careful hands quietly recorded the life of an entire civilization. The moon hung peacefully above the Nile Valley. Its pale light drifted across the rooftops of the sleeping village. The river shimmered softly in the darkness. Palm trees stood quietly against the night sky. Most families were asleep now. Inside their homes, people rested after another day of work. Farmers slept. Fishermen slept. Potters slept. Weavers slept. The village was calm. Only the Nile continued its endless journey beneath the stars. As the hours passed, the moon slowly crossed the sky. The night air remained cool and gentle. Eventually, the eastern horizon began to brighten once again. A new day was arriving. The familiar rhythm of life continued. The rooster called. Birds stirred among the trees. Doors opened. People emerged from their homes. The village awakened little by little. For Hori, the morning felt much like every other morning. Bread baking. Water being carried. Tools being gathered. The simple routines that shaped daily life. Yet elsewhere in Egypt, another kind of work was beginning. A quieter kind of work. Work that required neither fishing nets nor farming tools. Work performed with careful hands and patient minds. The work of scribes. Today, when many people think of ancient Egypt, they imagine great monuments covered with mysterious symbols. Rows of carved images. Birds. Eyes. Animals. Human figures. These symbols are known as hieroglyphs. For centuries they covered temple walls, tombs, statues, and monuments. But writing in ancient Egypt was much more than decoration. It was a way to preserve knowledge. A way to organize society. A way to remember. And behind every written record stood a scribe. Many Egyptians never learned to read or write. There was simply too much daily work to be done. Farming alone demanded enormous amounts of time and effort. Most knowledge passed through speech, observation, and practice. But scribes followed a different path. Their training often began when they were young. A boy might spend years learning symbols. Years learning vocabulary. Years learning how to write clearly and accurately. The process required dedication. Thousands of signs had to be understood. Mistakes could cause confusion. Precision mattered. One such scribe lived in a larger town not far from the village. His name was Pentu. Unlike Hori, Pentu spent much of his day indoors. His tools were simple: brushes, ink, sheets of papyrus. Yet these humble objects carried tremendous importance. Every morning, Pentu prepared his writing materials carefully. Nothing was wasted. Papyrus required labor to produce. Ink had to be prepared properly. Brushes needed maintenance. A scribe respected his tools, much as a farmer respected his plow, or a fisherman respected his nets. As sunlight filled the room, Pentu began his work. His hand moved steadily across the papyrus. Line after line appeared, each symbol carefully placed, each word carrying meaning. The room was quiet except for the faint scratching of the brush. It was peaceful work. Work that required concentration. Many records concerned practical matters: grain storage, taxes, deliveries, work assignments, inventories, lists. Details that might seem ordinary. Yet these records helped Egypt function. Without organization, even the most powerful kingdom would struggle. The hidden side of Egypt often existed in these practical details. Not in ceremonies, not in monuments, but in records, measurements, accounts, daily responsibilities. Scribes helped manage all of it. Pentu sometimes recorded shipments arriving by boat. How much grain had arrived? How much fish had been delivered? How many workers had completed a task? Every detail mattered. The work might appear repetitive, yet repetition brought order. Order brought stability, and stability helped communities thrive. As the morning progressed, sunlight moved across the floor. Outside, people continued their daily routines. Merchants opened market stalls. Craftsmen began their work. Farmers tended crops. Life unfolded throughout the region. Much of it would never be written down. Yet small pieces occasionally appeared in the records. A shipment, a harvest, a construction project. Tiny glimpses of ordinary lives. One reason historians know anything about ancient Egypt today is because scribes preserved information. Their records survived where memories could not. Papyrus documents, stone inscriptions, administrative notes, letters. Together they created windows into the past. Without scribes, much of Egypt's story would have disappeared. As the day continued, Pentu worked patiently. He had learned that rushing often created mistakes. A careful pace produced better results. Many ancient professions valued patience. Farming required patience. Fishing required patience. Craftsmanship required patience. Writing required patience too. The culture itself often rewarded steady effort. The Nile taught that lesson repeatedly. Crops grew slowly. Floods followed natural cycles. Life unfolded according to rhythms larger than any individual. In the afternoon, Pentu reviewed completed documents. Accuracy was important. Errors could create problems. So he checked his work carefully. Line by line. Symbol by symbol. The process demanded attention. Yet there was satisfaction in doing something well. A satisfaction familiar to craftsmen throughout Egypt. Whether shaping clay or writing records, skill mattered. Elsewhere, Hori continued working in the fields. He knew little about administrative records. He rarely thought about written documents. His concerns were practical. Water levels, crop health, weather, family. Yet his life still connected to the work of scribes. The grain harvested by farmers might later be counted, stored, recorded, distributed. Invisible threads linked different parts of society together. Most people never saw the entire picture. They only saw their own role. Yet every role mattered. This interconnectedness was one of Egypt's hidden strengths. Farmers produced food. Craftsmen created tools. Boat builders maintained transportation. Scribes preserved information. Together they formed a system larger than themselves. As afternoon drifted toward evening, Pentu finally set aside his brush. The day's work was ending. The sunlight outside had softened. Shadows stretched longer across the streets. Soon families would gather for meals. The familiar evening rhythm would begin. Before leaving, Pentu looked briefly at the completed records. Simple documents. Ordinary documents. Nothing grand. Yet perhaps that was precisely their value. History often celebrates extraordinary events. But everyday records reveal everyday life. They reveal how people lived, worked, traded, organized their communities. The hidden side of Egypt often appears most clearly in these ordinary details. The amount of grain stored in a warehouse. The tools issued to workers. The food provided during a project. Small pieces of information. Yet together they form a picture of a living society. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, Pentu stepped outside. The air felt pleasant. A gentle breeze moved through the streets. People greeted one another. Children played nearby. Life continued. Much as it had yesterday. Much as it would tomorrow. The Nile flowed quietly beyond the town. Its waters reflecting the golden colors of evening. Once again, another day was ending. Another day added to Egypt's long story. A story preserved not only by kings and monuments, but by farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, families, and by the patient scribes whose careful hands helped memory survive the passing of time. The sky slowly deepened toward dusk. The first evening stars began appearing overhead. And as darkness prepared to settle across the valley once more, another hidden chapter waited quietly ahead. A chapter about markets, traders, and the simple exchanges that connected villages all along the Nile. The evening stars slowly appeared above the Nile. One by one, tiny points of light emerged from the deepening blue sky. The river reflected the fading colors of sunset. Palm trees swayed gently in the cooling breeze. Throughout the village, families gathered for their evening meals. Another day was drawing to a close. Yet somewhere nearby, preparations for tomorrow were already beginning. Baskets were being woven. Fishing nets were being repaired. Grain was being measured. Clay jars were being filled. Life in ancient Egypt rarely stood still. Even during moments of rest, people often thought about the work that awaited them the next day. As darkness settled across the valley, Hori sat outside his home. The air felt pleasant after the heat of the afternoon. Nearby, neighbors spoke softly beneath the stars. Children listened to stories. Older villagers remembered events from years gone by. The sounds were gentle, comforting. The kind of sounds that made a village feel alive. Eventually, one by one, the homes grew quiet. Oil lamps dimmed. Conversations ended. Sleep returned to the Nile Valley. The moon rose higher. The river continued flowing through the darkness. And somewhere beyond the horizon, another dawn slowly approached. When morning finally arrived, it brought something slightly different from the usual routine. Today was market day. Across many parts of Egypt, markets played an important role in daily life. They were places where goods changed hands. Places where news traveled. Places where distant communities connected. Long before modern roads and shops, markets helped bind society together. As the first sunlight touched the village, people began preparing. Farmers gathered produce. Fishermen sorted their catch. Craftsmen selected items to sell or trade. The atmosphere felt quietly busy. Not hurried. Not chaotic. Simply purposeful. Hori's father prepared several sacks of grain. The harvest had been good enough to allow some surplus. That surplus could be exchanged for things the family needed. Perhaps pottery. Perhaps cloth. Perhaps tools. Trade allowed communities to obtain items they could not easily produce themselves. Soon Hori joined his father on the path toward the riverside market. The journey was familiar. Other villagers traveled alongside them. Some carried baskets balanced upon their shoulders. Others guided donkeys loaded with goods. The morning air remained cool. Birds sang among the trees. The Nile sparkled beneath the rising sun. As they approached the market area, activity gradually increased. Boats rested along the shoreline. People moved between stalls. Voices blended into a steady murmur. Nothing felt loud. Nothing felt overwhelming. The market possessed its own rhythm. A rhythm shaped by conversation and exchange. At first glance, the market appeared simple. Wooden tables. Woven mats. Baskets filled with goods. Yet beneath that simplicity existed a remarkable network of connections. Products arrived from nearby villages. From larger towns. Sometimes from distant regions far beyond the horizon. Every item carried a story. Every object had traveled a path. A fisherman displayed fresh fish caught earlier that morning. Their scales glimmered in the sunlight. Nearby, a potter arranged rows of carefully crafted vessels. Storage jars. Bowls. Cooking pots. Each one shaped by skilled hands. A weaver displayed folded linen cloth. The fabric felt smooth and cool. The result of many hours spent at a loom. Elsewhere, baskets overflowed with vegetables. Onions. Beans. Lettuce. Dates. Simple foods that formed part of daily life. Hori enjoyed observing the market. There was always something interesting to see. New faces. New goods. New stories. Markets offered glimpses into lives beyond one's own village. A traveler might describe another community farther down the river. A merchant might mention unusual goods from distant places. Small pieces of information spread naturally through conversation. In this way, news traveled across Egypt. Not through announcements, but through people. Through ordinary interactions. Through shared experiences. Hori's father soon began discussing grain with another trader. The conversation was calm. Respectful. Trade often involved negotiation. Not arguments. Not conflict. Simply two people trying to reach an agreement. The process required trust. Reputation mattered greatly. A person known for fairness often found it easier to conduct business. Over time, relationships formed. Regular traders recognized one another. Communities became interconnected. The hidden side of Egypt lived within these relationships. Not merely in the exchange of goods, but in the exchange of trust. As the morning continued, the market grew busier. More boats arrived. More villagers appeared. The sounds remained gentle. Footsteps on packed earth. Voices carried by the breeze. The occasional bray of a donkey. The rustle of baskets. The splash of water near the riverbank. Together these sounds created the atmosphere of a living community. One merchant displayed beautiful beads. Small objects. Simple objects. Yet carefully crafted. Children often admired such items. Adults did too. People everywhere appreciate beauty. Ancient Egyptians were no exception. Even ordinary households often included decorative objects. Not because they were necessary, but because they brought pleasure. A touch of beauty to daily life. Nearby, another trader sold tools. Wooden handles. Copper blades. Practical items. Essential items. A good tool could save many hours of labor. As a result, quality mattered. Buyers inspected carefully. Craftsmanship earned respect. Throughout Egypt, skilled workers built reputations through consistent effort. The market reflected this. People remembered who produced reliable goods. Trust developed over time. By midday, sunlight filled the entire riverside area. The heat gradually increased. Some traders sought shade beneath simple coverings. Others continued working beneath the open sky. The pace slowed slightly. Yet activity continued. The market remained alive. For many people, market day offered more than economic benefits. It provided social connection. Friends met one another. Families exchanged news. Travelers shared stories. The market became a gathering place. A place where community could be felt. Hori noticed several older men seated together beneath a tree. They spoke quietly while observing the activity around them. Perhaps they had attended markets for decades. Perhaps they had watched children grow into adults. Perhaps they remembered market days from long ago. The thought made Hori smile. Some things changed. Many things remained familiar. The market itself had likely existed in some form for generations. And generations before that. The Nile made such connections possible. Without the river, trade would have been far more difficult. Boats carried goods efficiently. The current helped movement northward. The winds often assisted travel southward. The river connected communities like a thread connecting beads. A village might seem isolated. Yet through trade, it became part of something larger. Part of a broader network stretching across the valley. This network helped spread ideas, skills, materials, knowledge. The hidden strength of Egypt was not found only in its rulers. It was found in these connections. Connections built through countless everyday interactions. As afternoon approached, some traders began preparing for the journey home. Goods had been exchanged. Conversations completed. Agreements reached. The market slowly began to quiet. Not completely, but gradually. Like a tide retreating from the shore. Hori and his father gathered their purchases. The family had acquired useful items. Things needed for daily life. The grain they brought had served its purpose. Trade had transformed one resource into another. Such exchanges helped communities thrive. The walk home felt peaceful. The afternoon sun cast long shadows. The river glimmered beside them. Birds drifted across the sky. The village awaited their return. As they traveled, Hori reflected on everything he had seen. The fishermen. The potters. The weavers. The merchants. The travelers. Each person carried a different story. Yet all were connected. The market revealed those connections. It showed how many lives overlapped. How many people depended upon one another. The famous monuments of Egypt often suggest a civilization built from stone. Yet the hidden reality was much softer. Much more human. It was built from relationships. From cooperation. From shared effort. From countless ordinary exchanges repeated day after day. As the village came into view, the afternoon light softened toward evening. Another day was slowly coming to rest. And beyond the quiet paths and mud-brick homes, another chapter of Egypt's hidden story waited patiently. A chapter about children, growing up beside the Nile, learning the skills and traditions that would shape the next generation. The afternoon sunlight rested softly upon the village as Hori and his father returned from the market. The path wound beside the Nile, where reeds moved gently in the breeze. The river glowed beneath the lowering sun. Boats drifted lazily across the water. The day felt peaceful. Market days always seemed slightly different from ordinary days. New faces had been seen. New stories had been heard. New goods had arrived. Yet as Hori approached home, the familiar sights of village life welcomed him once again. Children ran through the narrow paths. A woman carried water from the river. A potter arranged finished vessels outside his workshop. Nearby, a fisherman repaired a small tear in his net. Life continued as it always did. Steady. Reliable. Comforting. As Hori stepped into the courtyard, he noticed his younger sister Nefru sitting beneath a patch of shade with several other children. They were listening carefully to an elderly woman from the village. The old woman spoke softly. The children watched her with great attention. She was not telling a grand story about kings or battles. She was showing them how to weave a simple cord. Patiently. Slowly. One movement at a time. This was how much learning happened in ancient Egypt. Not in large schools. Not through books. But through observation. Through practice. Through everyday life. Children learned by watching the adults around them. The village itself became their classroom. The fields became their classroom. The river became their classroom. Every day offered new lessons. A young child might learn how to carry water without spilling it. Another might learn how to shape clay. Another might learn how to repair fishing nets. Skills were passed down naturally. Generation after generation. The hidden side of Egypt depended on this quiet transfer of knowledge. Without it, traditions would have vanished. As the afternoon continued, Nefru carefully copied the elderly woman's movements. Her small hands worked slowly. The cord was uneven. Not perfect. But that did not matter. Every skill begins imperfectly. Every craftsman was once a beginner. Every expert was once a child. The elderly woman smiled gently. She remembered her own childhood. She remembered making mistakes. Learning patience. Learning through repetition. These memories connected generations. The old teaching the young. The young growing into adults. The cycle continuing endlessly. Nearby, several boys practiced throwing small sticks at a target drawn in the dirt. Their laughter echoed through the village. Children everywhere find ways to play. Ancient Egypt was no different. Although daily responsibilities existed, there was still room for games and imagination. Some children played with carved wooden toys. Others created games using stones. Some simply invented adventures among the trees and riverbanks. The details changed across time. The joy of childhood remained remarkably familiar. As evening slowly approached, the village became filled with soft activity. Families prepared meals. Animals returned to their enclosures. The air cooled pleasantly. Hori watched the children for a moment. He remembered his own childhood. Not long ago, he had been much like them. Running beside the river. Learning from older family members. Watching adults perform tasks that once seemed mysterious. Now those same tasks felt natural. Knowledge had become habit. The transformation happened gradually. So gradually that it was difficult to notice. Yet every child eventually crossed that bridge. Step by step. Lesson by lesson. Ancient Egyptian parents understood this well. They rarely rushed the process. Life itself provided opportunities to learn. A child helping prepare food learned responsibility. A child assisting in the fields learned patience. A child observing craftsmen learned skill. The lessons were practical, useful, grounded in everyday experience. As the sunlight softened, an older fisherman named Jahudi walked toward the river with his grandson. The boy carried a small fishing net. It was much smaller than the nets used by adults. Yet it served an important purpose. Practice. The old fisherman spoke quietly as they walked. He pointed toward the water. Toward the reeds. Toward places where fish often gathered. The boy listened carefully. These lessons could not be fully explained through words alone. They required experience, observation, time. Jahudi understood that. His own grandfather had once taught him in much the same way. Generations connected through shared knowledge. The hidden side of Egypt often lived in these simple moments. A grandparent teaching a grandchild. A parent guiding a son or daughter. A craftsman mentoring an apprentice. Small scenes repeated countless times across centuries. Scenes rarely recorded by scribes. Yet essential to the survival of society. Without teachers, there would be no future craftsmen. Without guidance, there would be no future farmers. Without patience, traditions would disappear. As evening approached, golden light spread across the village. The Nile reflected the colors of the sky. Palm trees cast long shadows. Birds began returning to their resting places. The world seemed calm, unhurried. The children gradually drifted back toward their homes. Their lessons for the day were finished. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to learn. New tasks. New experiences. Learning in ancient Egypt never truly stopped. Even adults continued gaining knowledge throughout their lives. Farmers learned from changing weather patterns. Fishermen learned from the river. Craftsmen refined their skills. Everyone remained a student of something. As darkness slowly approached, families gathered once more for their evening meals. The scent of bread filled the air. Oil lamps flickered inside homes. Conversations flowed softly. Stories were shared. The village settled into its familiar nighttime rhythm. Nefru sat beside her family and proudly showed the cord she had made. It was imperfect, uneven in places. Yet her mother smiled warmly. The cord represented something larger. A new skill. A new lesson. A small step toward adulthood. Hori watched quietly. The scene felt comforting. Simple. Yet meaningful. History often focuses on rulers and monuments because they leave visible traces behind. But civilizations survive through something less visible. Knowledge. Skills. Traditions. Values. These things travel through people. from one generation to another. The true strength of ancient Egypt was not only found in stone structures. It was found in memory, in teaching, in learning, in the countless lessons shared beside rivers, fields, workshops, and family tables. Outside, the stars began appearing overhead. One by one. The same stars watched over children growing up across the Nile Valley. Children who would become farmers, fishermen, weavers, potters, scribes, builders, parents, teachers. Each generation carrying the civilization forward. Quietly, patiently, steadily. Just as the Nile carried its waters toward the sea. As the village drifted toward sleep once more, another hidden chapter of Egypt's story waited beyond the darkness. A chapter about women whose daily work shaped families, households, and communities in ways that history often overlooks. The stars shimmered above the Nile Valley. Their reflections trembled softly upon the dark surface of the river. A cool breeze moved through the reeds along the shore. Most of the village had fallen asleep. Oil lamps had been extinguished. Conversations had faded. Even the animals rested quietly beneath the night sky. Only the Nile remained awake, flowing steadily through the darkness, as it had for countless generations. Inside Hori's home, the family slept peacefully. The day's work was finished. The market had come and gone. Lessons had been learned. Stories had been shared. Now the village rested beneath a blanket of stars. Hour after hour, the night passed gently. The moon crossed the sky. The air remained cool. Then slowly, almost unnoticed, dawn began to arrive once more. A faint glow appeared in the east. The stars gradually faded. Birds stirred among the palm trees. The familiar rhythm of another day began. And long before most people were fully awake, many women throughout the village were already beginning their work. The hidden side of ancient Egypt cannot be understood without them. Their labor touched nearly every part of daily life. Yet history often speaks of them only briefly. The monuments rarely tell their stories. The grand inscriptions rarely celebrate their efforts. But within homes across Egypt, women carried enormous responsibilities. As the first light entered the village, Hori's mother was already awake. Like many women of her time, she had developed a routine shaped by years of experience. The morning tasks awaited her. Water needed to be collected. Food needed to be prepared. The household needed attention. These responsibilities might appear ordinary. Yet they were essential. Without them, daily life would quickly become difficult. She stepped outside into the cool morning air. The village remained quiet. A few doors opened nearby. Other women were beginning their day as well. Some carried empty jars toward the river. Others gathered fuel for cooking fires. The path slowly filled with movement. Gentle movement. Purposeful movement. The Nile shimmered beneath the rising sun. As Hori's mother approached the riverbank, she joined several neighbors. The women greeted one another warmly. Many had known each other for years. Some had grown up together. Some had raised children at the same time. Shared responsibilities often created strong bonds. Daily routines brought people together. Conversations flowed naturally. News spread. Advice was exchanged. Friendships deepened. These moments rarely appear in historical records. Yet they formed an important part of village life. The riverbank was more than a source of water. It was also a place of connection. A place where community could be felt. After filling her jars, Hori's mother carefully carried them home. The weight required balance and strength. She had performed this task countless times. Her movements were practiced and efficient. Experience made difficult work appear effortless. Back at the house, preparations for breakfast began. Grain was ground. Dough was prepared. The fire was lit. The familiar scent of baking bread gradually filled the air. Throughout Egypt, countless women were performing similar tasks. Day after day. Year after year. Generation after generation. Bread remained at the heart of daily meals. Producing it required labor. More labor than many people realize. The grain had to be harvested, stored, ground into flour, mixed with water, shaped, baked. Each step demanded time and effort. The final loaf represented the work of many hands. As the morning progressed, the village became fully awake. Children emerged from homes. Farmers prepared for the fields. Craftsmen opened their workshops. The day moved forward. Yet much of the village's stability depended upon what happened inside its households. Women managed supplies, organized resources, prepared meals, produced textiles, raised children, maintained order. Their work provided structure to everyday life. In many ways, the household functioned as the foundation of society. A well-managed home supported a healthy family. Healthy families supported the community. The hidden side of Egypt rested upon these foundations. Foundations rarely visible from a distance, but deeply important. As the sun climbed higher, Hori's mother joined Nefru in a weaving task. The loom stood beneath a shaded area. Thread stretched carefully across the frame. The process required concentration and patience. Always patience. The two worked side by side. The mother occasionally offered guidance. A small correction. A useful suggestion. A reminder to slow down. These quiet teaching moments happened everywhere. Knowledge flowed naturally between generations. Not through formal lessons, but through shared work. Nefru listened closely. She wanted to improve. She wanted to learn. The fabric grew slowly beneath their hands. Thread crossing thread. Row after row. The work felt calm. Almost meditative. Many ancient tasks possessed this quality. Repetition created rhythm. Rhythm created focus. Focus created a sense of peace. Elsewhere in the village, another woman cared for a small garden. The plants required attention. Watering. Weeding. Observation. Gardens provided useful foods and herbs. Small spaces could produce surprising amounts of value. Ancient Egyptians understood this well. They paid close attention to the natural world. They learned which plants thrived, which plants healed, which plants nourished. This knowledge often passed through women. Knowledge accumulated over generations. Knowledge rooted in experience. By midday, the heat settled over the valley. The sunlight became stronger. Many people sought shade. Work continued, but at a slower pace. Inside homes, thick mud brick walls helped create cooler spaces. Families adapted to the climate. They understood its rhythms. They understood its challenges. Generations of experience had taught them how to live comfortably within their environment. As afternoon arrived, several women gathered together to work on textile production. The atmosphere felt pleasant. Conversation mixed with labor. Stories were shared. Advice was exchanged. Laughter occasionally appeared. These gatherings strengthened social bonds. People supported one another, helped one another, listened to one another. The community became stronger through these connections. History often focuses upon individuals. Yet daily life frequently depended upon cooperation. The hidden side of Egypt was deeply communal. People relied upon one another, not only for survival, but for companionship, for encouragement, for belonging. As the day slowly moved toward evening, Hori returned from the fields. The familiar scent of cooking greeted him. His mother had spent the day working steadily. Like countless women across Egypt, much of her labor remained invisible. No monuments would celebrate it. No inscriptions would record it. Yet its importance was undeniable. The meal waiting on the table, the clothing worn by the family, the organized household, the lessons taught to children, all reflected her effort, and the efforts of countless women throughout the Nile Valley. The famous rulers of Egypt could issue commands. Architects could design temples. Builders could raise monuments. Yet none of those achievements would have been possible without strong households supporting society beneath them. The foundations of civilization are often quiet. They are built through routine, through care, through consistency, through daily acts repeated over many years. As evening settled over the village once more, families gathered together. The sky turned gold, then orange, then deep blue. The first stars appeared overhead. Meals were shared. Stories were told. The day's work slowly faded into memory. Nefru sat beside her mother and continued practicing the skills she had learned earlier. Her movements were becoming smoother, more confident. The process would take time. But time was something ancient Egypt understood well. The Nile taught patience. The seasons taught patience. Life itself taught patience. Outside, the river flowed beneath the growing darkness. Steady, calm, unchanging. A silent witness to countless generations. Generations of women whose names have largely disappeared from history, yet whose work shaped families, communities, and the civilization itself. The hidden side of ancient Egypt lived within their efforts, within their knowledge, within their quiet strength. And as the village slowly drifted toward sleep beneath the stars, another chapter of Egypt's forgotten world waited ahead. A chapter about homes, courtyards, rooftops, and the simple spaces where ordinary people spent most of their lives. Night settled gently over the Nile Valley. The stars shone clearly above the village. Their light reflected faintly upon the river as it flowed through the darkness. A soft breeze moved among the palm trees. Reeds whispered along the water's edge. Inside the homes of the village, families rested. The day's work had ended. The fields were quiet. The workshops were silent. The boats rested along the shore. Only the Nile continued its patient journey beneath the moonlight. As the hours passed, the village slept peacefully. And like countless nights before it, darkness slowly gave way to dawn. The eastern sky brightened. Birds began to sing. A rooster called from somewhere among the houses. Another day was beginning. For Hori and his family, the morning started in the familiar way. The scent of bread, the sound of footsteps, the quiet preparation for work. Yet before we follow them into another day, let us remain for a while inside the homes where ordinary Egyptians spent much of their lives. History often leads us toward pyramids and temples. But most people never lived in such places. Most people lived in simple houses. Mud brick houses. Homes shaped by practicality, climate, and tradition. Homes filled with the ordinary details of daily life. From the outside, many village houses looked similar. Their walls were made from mud mixed with straw and dried beneath the sun. These mud bricks were inexpensive and effective. They helped keep homes cool during hot days. They also provided warmth during cooler nights. The builders understood their environment well. Generations of experience had taught them what worked best. Hori's house stood among several similar homes. Its walls were thick. Its roof was flat. Its doorway opened toward a small courtyard. Nothing about it appeared grand. Yet it served its purpose beautifully. Inside, the rooms were simple. The floor was packed earth. A few woven mats covered certain areas. Storage jars stood against the walls. Wooden stools provided seating. Small chests held useful possessions. Everything had a purpose. Nothing existed merely for decoration. Resources required effort to obtain. As a result, possessions were valued carefully. The household contained only what was needed. Yet the simplicity created its own kind of comfort. The rooms felt familiar, orderly, welcoming. As morning sunlight entered through small openings, the interior gradually brightened. The thick walls kept much of the heat outside. This was especially important during the hottest months. Ancient Egyptian builders understood how to create comfortable living spaces long before modern technology existed. The climate itself had taught them. One of the most important areas of the home was the storage space. Large clay jars held grain. Others contained oil. Some stored dried foods. A family's security often depended upon these supplies. Good harvests filled the jars. Poor harvests left them emptier. As a result, storage required careful management. Families paid close attention to their resources. Waste was avoided whenever possible. Each jar represented labor. Each jar represented future meals. Nearby stood the cooking area. Simple but essential. This was where bread was baked. Where vegetables were prepared. Where meals came together after long days of work. The cooking fire often became the heart of the household. A place of activity. A place of conversation. A place where family members gathered. The smells associated with cooking became deeply familiar. Bread baking. Onions roasting. Fresh herbs being prepared. These scents formed part of daily life. Part of what made a house feel like home. As the morning continued, Hori's mother moved through the household with practiced ease. She knew where everything belonged. Which supplies needed attention. Which tasks required priority. The smooth functioning of the home depended upon this knowledge. Knowledge accumulated over many years. Knowledge often passed from one generation to another. Nearby, Nefru helped organize several storage baskets. She was learning. Watching carefully. Absorbing routines that would one day feel natural to her. The household itself became a place of education. Children learned responsibility through participation. Through observation. Through experience. Outside the main rooms, the courtyard served many purposes. This open space often became one of the busiest parts of the home. Food could be prepared there. Craft work could be completed there. Children could play there. Neighbors could visit there. The courtyard connected indoor and outdoor life. It provided fresh air, sunlight, space to work, space to gather. Throughout Egypt, countless courtyards witnessed daily routines unfolding year after year. Small moments rarely recorded by history, yet deeply important to the people living them. As the day warmed, another part of the home became useful: the roof. Many Egyptian houses featured flat rooftops that could be accessed by simple stairways. These rooftops offered additional living space. During cooler evenings, families sometimes sat there together. The higher position allowed breezes to pass more freely. The view often stretched across neighboring homes toward the Nile beyond. For children, rooftops could feel almost magical. A place to watch sunsets. A place to count stars. A place to imagine distant lands beyond the horizon. Hori often enjoyed visiting the roof during quiet moments. From there, he could observe the village. The paths winding between homes. The smoke rising from cooking fires. The palm trees swaying gently. The river glimmering in the distance. Everything seemed connected. Everything felt familiar. As afternoon approached, the sunlight became stronger. Many activities shifted into shaded areas. The thick mud brick walls continued doing their work, keeping interiors cooler than the outside air. These simple structures reflected centuries of practical wisdom. Ancient builders understood their environment intimately. They built accordingly, not for appearance, but for comfort and function. The hidden side of Egypt often reveals itself through such details. Not through grand achievements, but through practical solutions. Through everyday ingenuity. Through the accumulated knowledge of ordinary people. As the hours passed, life flowed naturally through the home. Meals were prepared. Tools were stored. Clothing was repaired. Conversations took place. Visitors arrived and departed. The house remained alive with quiet activity. Each room played its part. Each object served a purpose. The household functioned like a small world unto itself. A world shaped by routine, by care, by habit, by memory. Many important moments occurred within these walls. Births, celebrations, conversations, lessons, stories shared beside evening lamps, children growing into adults, generations passing through the same spaces. The walls witnessed all of it. Yet most of those moments left no lasting record. Only traces. Only hints. Only fragments waiting to be discovered centuries later. As evening slowly returned, golden light touched the rooftops. Long shadows stretched across the village. Families gathered once again. The familiar cycle continued. Another meal. Another conversation. Another peaceful evening beside the Nile. Hori climbed to the roof as the sun lowered toward the horizon. The sky glowed with warm colors. Orange. Gold. Soft red. The river reflected them all. For a while, he simply watched. The village looked beautiful from above. Simple. Quiet. Comforting. Not a place of kings. Not a place of monuments. But a place of ordinary lives. Lives spent within mud brick walls. Lives shaped by family, work, and community. Lives forming the hidden foundation of ancient Egypt. As darkness slowly spread across the valley, stars began appearing overhead once again. The rooftops cooled. The air softened. The Nile continued flowing beneath the moonlight. And beyond the quiet homes of the village, another chapter of Egypt's forgotten story waited patiently. A chapter about food, gardens, and the everyday meals that sustained millions of people for thousands of years. The evening breeze drifted gently across the rooftops of the village. Above, the stars shone brightly against the dark sky. Below, The Nile moved quietly through the valley, reflecting the moonlight in soft silver patterns. The day had ended peacefully. Families rested inside their homes. The cooking fires had faded. Conversations had grown quiet. Children slept beneath woven blankets. The village seemed wrapped in stillness. Yet even as people slept, the cycle of life continued. The river flowed. The reeds swayed. The stars crossed the heavens. And somewhere beyond the darkness, another dawn slowly approached. As morning arrived, pale light spread across the Nile Valley. Birds welcomed the new day with gentle calls. Palm trees cast long shadows across the earth. The coolness of night lingered for a little while longer. Inside Hori's home, his mother was already awake. Like every morning, food preparation would soon begin. For ancient Egyptians, food was more than simple nourishment. It was woven into every part of daily life. Food shaped routines. Food shaped labor. Food shaped celebrations. The hidden story of Egypt can often be found in kitchens, gardens, and storage jars rather than monuments. Because long before temples were built, people needed to eat. And every meal represented the efforts of countless hands. As sunlight entered the home, Hori's mother began preparing grain. The grain had been harvested months earlier. Stored carefully. Protected from moisture and pests. Now it would become flour. The process required patience. Using a stone grinding tool, she crushed the grain steadily. Back and forth. Again and again. The sound was familiar throughout Egypt. For thousands of years, people woke to that same sound. The quiet rhythm of grain becoming flour. The work demanded strength. It demanded endurance. Yet it was essential. Without flour, there would be no bread. And bread stood at the center of Egyptian life. Almost every family ate it. Almost every day. Rich families enjoyed many varieties. Poor families often relied upon simpler versions. But bread connected everyone. As the flour gradually accumulated, dough was prepared. Water was added. The mixture was kneaded carefully. Then shaped into loaves. Soon the familiar smell of baking bread filled the house. Warm. Comforting. Inviting. The aroma drifted through the doorway and into the courtyard. Many people today would instantly recognize that scent. Some things remain timeless. The smell of fresh bread is one of them. Nearby, another important food was being prepared. Beer. To modern ears, that may sound surprising. Yet in ancient Egypt, beer was a common part of daily life. It was not consumed in the same way many people think of beer today. Instead, it often served as a nutritious drink made from grain. Workers drank it. Families drank it. Even children sometimes consumed weaker versions. It provided calories and nourishment. Producing it required skill. The process varied, but grain remained at its heart. Once again, we see how important agriculture was to Egyptian society. The grain fields supported far more than bread alone. After breakfast, the village slowly settled into its daily rhythm. Farmers moved toward the fields. Craftsmen opened their workshops. Children assisted with household tasks. Life continued. Yet food remained present in nearly every aspect of the day. Not far from Hori's home stood a small garden. Gardens were valuable spaces. Even modest plots could produce useful crops. Onions. Beans. Lettuce. Herbs. Sometimes fruit trees. Every plant contributed something. Ancient Egyptians paid close attention to cultivation. Water was precious. So was fertile soil. Careful management made all the difference. Hori's mother often visited the garden during quieter moments. She inspected the plants, removed weeds, checked moisture levels. The work was gentle, steady, rewarding. Gardens offered more than food. They offered beauty. Green leaves, flowers, the sight of growing things. In a landscape bordered by vast desert, gardens held special meaning. They reminded people of life and abundance. The Nile made such abundance possible. Without the river, these gardens could not exist. Without irrigation, many crops would fail. Everything connected back to the water. The hidden side of Egypt often returns to the Nile. Its influence touched nearly every aspect of existence. By midday, the heat of the day settled over the valley. The sunlight became intense. Many workers paused briefly beneath shaded areas. Meals during the day were often simple. Bread, vegetables, dates, fish when available. Perhaps some fruit. Nothing elaborate. Yet these foods provided energy for labor. The meals reflected practicality. The ingredients reflected the local environment. People ate what the land and river could provide. As Hori rested beneath a palm tree, he shared food with his father. The meal was modest, but satisfying. The bread was fresh. The dates were sweet. The water was cool. Sometimes contentment emerges from simple things. Ancient Egyptians understood this. Life offered challenges. Yet it also offered small comforts. A good meal after hard work. Shade on a hot day. A cool breeze from the river. These moments mattered. Elsewhere in the village, women prepared food for later use. Some vegetables were dried. Some fish were preserved. Storage required planning. A family could not depend solely upon today's harvest or today's catch. The future always had to be considered. Good preparation reduced uncertainty. Storage jars filled with grain represented security. Preserved foods represented security. Ancient life required foresight. Families constantly balanced present needs with future needs. As afternoon slowly moved toward evening, cooking fires appeared once more. The familiar scents returned. Bread baking. Vegetables cooking. Herbs releasing their fragrance. The village seemed wrapped in comforting aromas. Every household possessed its own routines. Its own recipes. Its own traditions. Knowledge about food passed from generation to generation. A mother teaching a daughter. A grandmother sharing experience. A family preserving habits developed over many years. These traditions became part of cultural identity. Part of what connected people to their ancestors. As sunset approached, Hori returned home from the fields. The sky glowed softly above the Nile. Birds crossed the horizon. The evening meal awaited. Inside the house, the family gathered together. The atmosphere felt peaceful. The day's labor was finished. Now there was time for rest. Time for conversation. Time for food. The meal itself was not extravagant. Most meals were not. Yet the act of eating together carried meaning. Families strengthened bonds around shared meals. Stories were exchanged. News was discussed. Advice was offered. Laughter occasionally appeared. These moments helped create a sense of belonging. A sense of home. The hidden side of Egypt often lives in such moments. Not in grand ceremonies. not in monumental architecture, but in ordinary evenings, in shared food, in familiar faces, in simple routines repeated across generations. Outside, darkness gradually settled across the valley. The stars emerged once more. The Nile reflected the moonlight. The village grew quiet. Families prepared for sleep. Another day was ending. Another day added to the long history of ordinary people. People whose names have largely disappeared, yet whose daily lives formed the true foundation of Egyptian civilization. Bread baked, gardens tended, meals shared, children taught. These quiet activities sustained Egypt for centuries. And as the night deepened and the village drifted toward rest, another hidden chapter waited beyond the darkness. A chapter about illness, healing, and the gentle wisdom of those who cared for the sick beside the waters of the Nile. Night once again settled over the Nile Valley. The stars stretched across the sky like countless tiny lamps. Moonlight rested upon the river, turning its surface into a ribbon of silver. The village slept peacefully beneath the cool darkness. Inside their homes, families rested after another day of work. The farmers had returned from the fields. The fishermen had gathered their nets. The craftsmen had set aside their tools. The cooking fires had faded into glowing embers. Only the Nile continued moving through the night. Steady, patient, timeless. As the hours passed, the stars slowly crossed the heavens. The moon drifted westward. Then, little by little, another dawn arrived. The eastern sky brightened. Birds began to sing. Palm trees caught the first golden rays of sunlight. A new day was beginning. Like every morning, the village gradually came to life. Doors opened. Footsteps appeared along familiar paths. The scent of baking bread drifted through the air. Everything seemed ordinary. Everything seemed peaceful. Yet even in a place as stable as this, illness sometimes visited. No village was completely free from sickness. No family was completely untouched by injury. A cut from a tool. A fever during summer. A cough that lingered too long. Life beside the Nile brought many blessings, but it also brought challenges. And when those challenges appeared, people turned to those who understood the art of healing. Not far from Hori's home lived an elderly woman named Tani. She was respected throughout the village. Not because she possessed wealth. Not because she held political power. But because she had spent many years caring for others. Over time, she had learned much about herbs and remedies. Knowledge passed down through generations. Knowledge gathered through experience. When people felt unwell, they often sought her advice. That morning, as sunlight spread across the village, a young mother arrived at Tani's home carrying a worried expression. Her son had developed a fever during the night. The boy sat quietly beside her. His eyes looked tired. His movements seemed slower than usual. Tani listened carefully. She always listened first. Years of experience had taught her that observation was important. She asked gentle questions. How long had the fever lasted? Had the boy eaten? Had he slept? Small details mattered. The hidden side of Egypt often lived within such moments of care. Moments rarely recorded in grand histories, yet deeply important to the people experiencing them. After listening, Tani prepared a simple herbal remedy. Ancient Egyptians possessed considerable knowledge about plants. Over centuries, they had learned which herbs could soothe discomfort, which plants helped wounds heal, which ingredients offered relief. Not every remedy worked. Not every illness could be cured. Yet people continued learning, continued observing, continued sharing knowledge. The process was gradual, generation after generation. Much of this wisdom existed outside official records. It lived within families, within communities, within the memories of experienced healers. As the morning continued, Tani walked through her small garden. Many useful plants grew there, herbs carefully cultivated over the years. Each had a purpose. Each carried a story. She knew when to harvest them, how to prepare them, how to store them. The knowledge felt natural after so many years. Yet it represented a lifetime of learning. Nearby, Hori worked in the fields as usual. The grain moved softly in the breeze. Birds circled overhead. The day seemed calm. But even farmers occasionally faced injury. Tools could slip. Heavy objects could fall. Work carried risks. Throughout Egypt, people developed practical methods for treating wounds. Bandages, ointments, herbal preparations. Simple techniques refined through experience. Many remedies focused on cleanliness and protection, preventing further harm, allowing the body time to recover. Recovery often required patience. And patience was something Egyptians understood well. The Nile taught patience. Agriculture taught patience. Healing taught patience too. A wound healed in its own time. A fever passed in its own time. No amount of rushing could change that reality. By midday, the village settled into its familiar rhythm. The heat increased. Workers sought moments of shade. Children played quietly. Craftsmen continued their tasks. Meanwhile, Tani prepared additional remedies. A fisherman needed treatment for a cut on his hand. A woman sought relief for aching joints. An elderly neighbor complained of a persistent cough. The healer welcomed them all. Patiently. Kindly. She understood something important. Healing involved more than medicine. It involved comfort, reassurance, human connection. People often felt better simply knowing someone cared. Simply knowing someone was willing to help. The hidden side of Egypt included countless acts of compassion. Small acts. Ordinary acts. Yet meaningful ones. A neighbor offering assistance. A family caring for a sick relative. A healer sharing knowledge. These moments rarely appeared in official histories. Yet they shaped daily life. As afternoon approached, the young boy who had visited earlier began feeling slightly better. His fever had eased. His mother smiled with relief. Tani smiled as well. Not every outcome was positive. Ancient life could be difficult. Some illnesses remained mysterious. Some conditions resisted treatment. People understood this. Yet they continued caring for one another regardless. Hope remained important. Effort remained important. Compassion remained important. Elsewhere in Egypt, trained physicians also existed. Especially in larger towns and cities. Some possessed specialized knowledge. Records suggest that Egyptian medicine became remarkably sophisticated in certain areas. Doctors observed symptoms, studied injuries, developed treatments. The work combined practical experience with tradition. Yet even in villages far from major centers, healing often remained deeply personal. Rooted in community. Rooted in relationships. Rooted in trust. As the afternoon sunlight softened, Tani finally sat beneath the shade of a tree. The day had been busy. Yet she felt content. Helping others brought satisfaction. not because it brought recognition, but because it reduced suffering. And sometimes that was enough. Nearby, children played along the edge of the village. Their laughter drifted through the air. Life continued. The cycle continued. People grew older. People grew stronger. People occasionally became sick, then recovered. Such patterns existed everywhere. Across every generation. Across every civilization. The details changed. The human experience remained remarkably familiar. As evening approached, golden light spread across the valley. The Nile reflected the colors of sunset. Birds returned to their resting places. Families gathered once more. Cooking fires flickered to life. The village settled into another peaceful evening. Hori returned home from the fields. The scent of food greeted him. The familiar comfort of family awaited him. Inside, conversation flowed softly. Stories were shared. Plans were discussed. The day gradually came to rest. Outside, the stars prepared to return. The river continued flowing. The village slowly drifted toward sleep. And somewhere among the countless ordinary lives of ancient Egypt, healers like Tani continued their quiet work. Caring. Observing. Helping. Their names largely forgotten. Their contributions rarely celebrated. Yet their presence offered comfort in uncertain times. The hidden side of Egypt lived through such people. People who eased pain. People who shared wisdom. People who reminded their communities that no one faced hardship entirely alone. As darkness settled gently over the Nile Valley once more, another chapter of Egypt's forgotten world waited patiently beyond the night. A chapter about animals, the donkeys, cats, dogs, cattle, and countless creatures that shared daily life with the people of ancient Egypt. The stars shone quietly above the Nile Valley. Moonlight drifted across the rooftops of the village and rested upon the slow-moving river. The reeds along the shoreline swayed gently in the cool night breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called softly. Most of the village slept. The farmers rested after their work. The fishermen rested after long hours on the water. The craftsmen rested after shaping clay, weaving cloth, and repairing tools. The village had become peaceful once again. Yet not every living thing was asleep. Along the edge of a courtyard, a cat moved silently through the darkness. Its paws made almost no sound. Its eyes reflected the moonlight. Patiently, it searched for movement among the shadows. Cats had lived beside humans in Egypt for a very long time. And long before they became famous in stories and artwork, they had earned their place through usefulness. They protected grain supplies from mice and rats. They helped households preserve valuable food. In return, people often treated them with affection and respect. The cat paused near a storage jar. Its ears twitched. Its body remained perfectly still. Then, just as quietly, it disappeared into the darkness. The night continued. The Nile continued flowing. And eventually, dawn began to approach once more. The eastern sky brightened slowly. Stars faded. Birds awakened. The familiar rhythm of another day returned. As sunlight spread across the village, animals became visible everywhere. They were woven into daily life so completely that people rarely stopped to think about their importance. Yet the hidden side of ancient Egypt cannot be understood without them. Animals worked beside people, lived beside people, traveled beside people, fed people, helped people, and sometimes simply offered companionship. As Hori stepped outside his home, he greeted one of the family's most valuable possessions. Their donkey. The animal stood quietly near its enclosure. Patient. Reliable. Strong. Donkeys played an important role throughout Egypt. They carried supplies, transported grain, moved goods to market, helped families manage daily tasks. Without them, many jobs would have required far more effort. Hori gently stroked the animal's neck. The donkey flicked its ears and remained calm. A good donkey was highly valued. Its contribution might not seem dramatic, yet countless households depended upon such animals. History often remembers kings, but daily life often depended upon donkeys. As the morning progressed, villagers moved about their routines. Some led animals toward fields. Others prepared livestock for the day. Across Egypt, cattle represented another important resource. Cows provided milk. Oxen assisted with heavy labor. Their strength proved useful in agriculture and transportation. Maintaining healthy animals required attention and care. Food had to be provided. Water had to be available. Shelter had to be maintained. The relationship worked both ways. People depended upon animals. Animals depended upon people. Not far from the village, a farmer guided a pair of oxen through a field. The animals moved steadily. The work required patience. The farmer understood their behavior well. Years of experience had taught him how to work alongside them effectively. Many skills in ancient Egypt involved observation, understanding plants, understanding weather, understanding animals. Knowledge came through experience, through time spent paying attention. The hidden side of Egypt often reveals itself through these practical relationships. Elsewhere, goats wandered near a small enclosure. Children occasionally helped care for them. The animals provided milk and other useful resources. Their presence added another layer to village life. The sounds of animals became part of the daily atmosphere. The bray of a donkey, the lowing of cattle, the clucking of chickens. These sounds blended with human voices, birdsong, and the whisper of the breeze. Together they formed the soundtrack of ordinary life. As the morning continued, Nefru helped scatter feed for several chickens. The birds hurried forward eagerly. Children often enjoyed such tasks. They created opportunities to interact with animals directly. Many young people developed affection for the creatures around them, especially dogs and cats. Ancient Egyptian dogs served various roles. Some helped with hunting. Some guarded homes. Some simply became companions. Their loyalty was appreciated. Their presence offered comfort. In many ways, the bond between humans and dogs felt much the same as it does today. The details changed. The connection remained familiar. Near the river, another kind of animal attracted attention. Birds. The Nile supported remarkable bird life. Herons stood patiently in shallow water. Ducks glided across the surface. Other species moved among the reeds. The river created an environment rich with life. Fishermen observed birds carefully. Their behavior sometimes offered clues about fish activity. Nature often provided useful information to those willing to pay attention. As Hori worked in the fields, he occasionally watched birds circling overhead. The sight brought a sense of peace. The sky felt alive. The landscape felt connected. Every creature seemed to occupy its own place within a larger pattern. The Egyptians often noticed these patterns. Animals appeared frequently in art and stories. Not merely because they existed, but because people lived alongside them every day. They understood their habits, their strengths, their personalities. The natural world remained close. Far closer than many people experience today. By midday, the heat settled across the valley. Many animals sought shade. People did the same. The village slowed slightly. A dog slept beneath a tree. Goats rested near a wall. Birds became quieter. The entire landscape seemed to pause. The Nile alone continued moving steadily. As afternoon approached, fishermen prepared their boats. Some carried baskets. Others gathered nets. Several watched the water carefully. The river supported not only fish but many other forms of life. Ancient Egyptians understood that their prosperity depended upon maintaining a relationship with this environment. The river fed crops, supported animals, provided transportation, connected communities. Everything returned to the Nile. Again and again. The hidden side of Egypt often follows the same path. Back to the river. Back to ordinary life. Back to the countless living things that shared the landscape. As the afternoon sunlight softened, children played near the village. A small dog followed them eagerly. Its tail wagged constantly. The children laughed. The dog ran in circles. For a few moments, work and responsibility faded into the background. There was only play. Only joy. Only a simple connection between people and animals. History rarely records such scenes. Yet they happened. Day after day. Generation after generation. Ordinary moments. Human moments. As evening approached, villagers gradually returned home. Animals returned as well. Donkeys entered their enclosures. Goats settled down. Chickens found safe places to rest. The familiar evening routine unfolded. Cooking fires appeared. Families gathered. The sky turned gold, then orange, then deep blue. The first stars emerged overhead. Hori sat outside for a while before dinner. Nearby, the family donkey rested quietly. The animal had worked hard throughout the day. Tomorrow would bring more tasks. More journeys. More responsibilities. The cycle would continue. Just as it always had. The village felt calm. Comfortable. Alive. Not only with people, but with countless creatures sharing the same world. Cats moving through shadows. Dogs guarding homes. Birds crossing the sky. Donkeys carrying supplies. Cattle working fields. All part of the hidden story of ancient Egypt. A story far larger than monuments alone. As darkness settled across the Nile Valley once more, the stars reflected upon the river. The breeze moved gently through the reeds. The village prepared for sleep. And somewhere beyond the quiet horizon, another forgotten chapter waited patiently. A chapter about the changing seasons of the Nile and the annual flood that shaped every aspect of Egyptian life. And so, for now, we leave the village beside the Nile. The night has settled gently across the valley. The fields are still. The fishing boats rest along the riverbank. The workshops are silent. The cooking fires have faded into darkness. Above, the stars shine softly over Egypt, just as they did thousands of years ago. The great monuments still stand far away in the desert, but tonight our thoughts remain with the ordinary people whose stories are rarely told. The farmer who rose before dawn. The fisherman who trusted the river. The scribe who carefully recorded a day's work. The potter shaping clay beneath the sun. The mother baking bread for her family. The child learning a new skill beside a patient teacher. These were the people who filled ancient Egypt with life. Their names have mostly disappeared. Their voices have grown quiet. Yet their presence remains. In every field that was planted. In every home that sheltered a family. In every loaf of bread baked beside a small fire. In every boat that drifted upon the Nile. History often remembers kings and monuments. But the hidden side of Egypt lived in ordinary days. In routines. In friendships. In work completed with care. In small moments that seemed unimportant at the time. The gentle rhythm of life beside the river continued season after season. The Nile flowed. The crops grew. Children became adults. New generations took the place of those who came before. The cycle never hurried. It simply continued. Steadily. Patiently. Like the river itself. Now the moon hangs high above the water. The reeds sway softly in the night breeze. A distant bird calls once and then grows silent. The village sleeps. The river flows on through the darkness. And the ancient world slowly drifts away into the quiet distance. Like a memory fading beneath a sky full of stars. Until all that remains is the sound of the Nile moving gently through the night. And the peaceful feeling of a world at rest.